WRI's 10th Stories to Watch. I'm Robin Murphy, and I'm Vice President for Communications for the World Resources Institute. A couple of words first about WRI. We focus on Earth's natural resources and how human society uses them today and how we can sustain them for generations to come. We conduct evidence-based research and make sure that that our ideas have practical application and impact. We work globally with governments, business, and civil society to build transformative solutions that protect the Earth and improve people's lives. We have a staff of nearly 300 with operations in China, India, Brazil, and elsewhere. We are nonpartisan and we're independent. Now, for stories to watch today, we don't have a crystal ball at WRI, but through our work in several dozen countries, with many partners and many networks, we do get a sense of what may be on the horizon. This morning you will hear about environmental and sustainability stories that may emerge in the coming year, based on the best available evidence and our observations. As with every year, these stories reflect the best thinking of our outstanding staff experts who are here with us today, as well as WRI's new president, who will present this year's stories. It's a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrew Steer, who joined WRI in 2012 as its third president and CEO. He has devoted more than 3 decades to working in development issues in Africa and Asia and has deep experience in economics and in global development. An economist by training, Andrew had a distinguished career at the World Bank, where most recently he was the Special Envoy for Climate Change. He also served as country director in Indonesia and in Vietnam, and also served as the bank's director of its environmental department. Andrew also served as the Director General for Policy and Research at the UK Department of International Development, DFID, in London. Now, before I turn the podium over to Andrew, just a couple of quick housekeeping details. We have people listening in on the room on the telephone and following online. And if you want to join the discussion online, you can go to wri.org/STW13 to find our live blogging stream. If you're tweeting about this event, please use hashtag STW13, and your comments will be captured on our online chat. Andrew's PowerPoint presentation is online if you want to access it, and we'll also post the video and the audio of this once the event's completed. Finally, when we move into the Q&A session, immediately after Andrew's presentation, please, we'll have microphones for everybody. Please identify yourself and your organization as well as who you are. So again, welcome, and thanks for being with us. And now, Andrew Steer.
Morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome. Good to see old friends and new. What to watch for in 2013. Be interested to know in the discussion period afterwards whether or not you agree with the stories that we think are important to watch. Everyone knows who this is. Nate Silver got the election dead right based on election. We're not in the business of projection today or prediction, but we are in the business of drawing the very best evidence to bear on these very important issues. Now, before going into sort of what to watch for in 2013, first, just to look back a little bit. 2012 was a very important year because it was the 20th anniversary of the original Rio Earth Summit. So a lot of us spent a lot of time sort of reflecting, what sort of world do we live in? And it's been a spectacular last 2 decades. Never before in history have these kind of achievements been made in just 2 decades. Whether water, whether girls' access to education, a miracle. The maternal deaths are down by 50%. Nobody thought it was possible. 100% increase in real per capita incomes. Never happened before in history. And poverty reduced by half in 2 decades. The best 2 decades in history, or has it been such a great success? Well, these great gains have come at a cost, a debt, not only financial, but also ecological. So whether it's the deaths from pollution every year, 3.3 million, whether it's the size of England or North Carolina lost every single year in terms of deforestation, whether it's the fact that we have 3 times as much cement, which is a good thing, by the way, but it's caused all kinds of problems that weren't anticipated, carbon dioxide emissions up 50%. So that even I see some friends from the World Bank, even the conservative, stodgy old World Bank is now projecting a 4-degree Celsius increase in average world temperatures and looking at the extraordinary costs that that will bring. By the way, would encourage you to read that wonderful report that came out 2 months ago. So good news and bad news. We're all very much aware of the fact that the increase in carbon dioxide emission just seems to keep going up and up. By now, we should be declining. We're not. We're still increasing. If we don't reach a tipping point by 2020, we have very, very little chance of achieving the goal of limiting average world temperature increases to 2 degrees. So look at the increase that we've had over the last 60-odd years. This good news, bad news story is going to continue into the future. Urbanization from 3% globally in 1800 to 75% in 2050 is in many ways a good thing, but it also poses extraordinarily challenges. What kind of cities will people live in? What kind of lives will they live? What kind of transportation systems will they use? Those questions will determine, sort of in many ways, sort of the health of civilization for the next 100, 200 years. And so, too, as we are all aware of the fact the world population is going to grow from 7 billion to 9 billion, perhaps even more importantly in terms of pressures is the fact that whilst the global middle class was 1 billion in 1990, it's now doubled to 2 billion. It will rise by another 3 billion in the next 2 decades. And this matters because when you enter the middle class, you change your consumption patterns. And so whilst there are 800 million vehicles on the roads today, there may well be between 2 and 3 billion vehicles on the roads by 2035. Are we running out of things? We certainly have moved from what was a relatively empty world to a full world. Throughout the entire 20th century, we mainly saw declining commodity prices in real terms. And in the last decade, we've seen this happen. And very few serious observers expect these prices to come down in real terms hereafter. So we've moved from an empty world to a full world with all kinds of implications. So this brings us to 2013. As Robin says, we're not an environmental advocacy group by any means. We look at where economic and social development intersect with the natural world. And so the stories that I'm going to propose to you, and I'm going to suggest there are 6, really come from that intersection. And we need to really grapple with these if we're going to make progress. First, what kind of energy mix are we going to have? In the coming year, we'll show some very interesting signs. The starting point has to be that there are still 1.3 billion people without electricity. We all agree that needs to be remedied immediately. But what will that do? And what will the huge growth in demand for energy do? Well, there's really 3 fuels we need to think about. Coal. The last year alone, 55 plants, that's electricity generating plants in the United States, have been closed. You know, you could say that's very good. There are 395 remaining. But globally, coal consumption just keeps on rising and rising. World Resources Institute last month brought out a quite important report asking what are the plans for coal in terms of power generation in the coming years. So just looking at plants that are already planned, and here they are geographically, looks pretty equally spread until you add India. And then when you add China, you sort of get the story, which is 75% of the entire use of coal moving forward into the future in terms of new capacity will be in those 2 countries. Who's supplying the coal? Well, an increasing a number of countries are, but increasingly the United States is actually, because it's using less at home, it's now, as you see, has tripled its export of coal in the last decade. And this has, of course, important implications. So what to watch in terms of coal? How many of these 1,200 power plants that are currently under planning will actually be built? Will U.S. coal exports continue to grow? Second fuel to look at is natural gas, and particularly the revolution that's come from shale gas. And you can see that just as gas production was expected to decline in the United States, so the shale gas revolution has totally changed everything. So if you look at the projection of prices, this was the price of gas, and this is when shale gas really sort of came onto the market. These were the projections made in 2009, and then 2010 lowered again, 2011 lowered again, 2012. So we've had a totally sort of revolutionizing in the way we understand gas markets. Why does this matter to an institution like us or to you? Well, it's obviously a good thing that energy is cheaper. This can help our economy and the world's economy. It's a very good thing. It's also a very good thing in that carbon emissions from gas are half what they would be from coal, for example. So it's a fantastic bridging opportunity from where we are today to a low carbon. However, there are two risks we have to worry about. One, massive use of water and risks of methane emissions. Second, it's tempting to fall into a sense of security. We now have the dream fuel, so we're on our way now to solving climate change. Sadly, only reducing by half won't get you anywhere near where you need to get to. This is not the long-term solution. So it's worth noting that not only the United States has shale gas, lots of other countries do, especially China has more than any others. So what to watch for? Will the US shale gas boom continue, or will it level off? What kinds of conditions will be put in place? Some states, still a moratorium in New York State, for example. What will happen to the development of shale gas in China? Huge issues in China relating to water, also relating to technology. China's been buying up some energy companies in the West in order to learn how to do this better. United Kingdom and South Africa have just liberalized production of shale gas. Others are thinking very hard about it. France still has a ban. So there's much to play for in this territory. Potentially a very good development, but needs to be managed extremely carefully. The third sort of fuel that we need to look at is renewables. I think everyone's aware of the fact that we've had this sort of incredible increase. We've just got the 2012 numbers out 2 days ago from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. For the first time in 8 years, renewable energy investment worldwide has fallen by 8%. It's still, by the way, these are quarterly numbers. You have to add them up in order to get the total. Last year was 250. We're expecting next year a slight increase again. So remarkable increase, five-fold increase over the last 8 years. Will it continue? It's remarkable today that more than 100 countries, these are the ones in yellow, have renewable energy targets. 40 developing countries now have what are called feed-in tariffs. So there's a great deal of seriousness out there about renewable energy. It's interesting to note those countries that don't have a renewable energy target, and the United States is the only one in the industrial world that doesn't have them. So that's just one sort of policy. So what to watch? Will countries make progress on their commitments? We're seeing a remarkable growth of enthusiastic policy making with regard to renewable energy. Adding it all up, it's a huge improvement in terms of what's happening, but also adding it up is nowhere near where it needs to be. How will these policy changes impact outcomes? Happy to go, obviously, into much more detail. So that was the first story on the energy mix. The second one is what we call ecological progress in China. We choose that word carefully because it's a two-word phrase that the Chinese use a lot now, and it's a new phrase. I think everyone here knows that China is a driver of the world economy and the world use of resources. China accounts for maybe about 10% of world GDP, but in terms of its CO2 emissions, it's up there at 28%. In terms of steel, coal, and iron ore, just below 50%. And if you're interested in where cement is used most, 53% of the world's cement consumption occurs in China. Again, good news, bad news. It's good. We had amazing reductions in poverty, but you can imagine the stresses this is putting on the Chinese economy, and this illustrates it. I'm very grateful to the World Bank for these data, really asking how costly is environmental damage to a country like China. And the environmental damage, and these are even incomplete, by the way, mainly these are health effects, but also effects on indirect effects on GDP. Almost 10% of GDP is the value of environmental damage on China. So not surprising that China is taking this extraordinarily seriously. And everyone read the newspaper articles over the weekend, the worst pollution ever in Beijing. And so, maybe not surprisingly either, China has decided it's going to be a leader on renewable energy for a range of issues, one of which is a deep concern about their own environment. Another relates to a desire to be able to manage security of supply. So fossil-based fuels are inherently much more risky. You can't guarantee the quantity, and you can't guarantee the price. When it comes to renewable energy, you can actually, for solar and pretty much wind, you can guarantee the quantity and you can guarantee the price, because once you've set it up, the price basically stays the same at close to zero. So you can see that China, in terms of installed capacity of renewable, is now the world leader. The question for China, of course, is that we're now in a different world for China. We have new leadership, but we also have a different economic trajectory. So we're starting to see the lowest growth rates in a decade, and obviously all the economists are wondering where it will go next. And the assumption is it will stay at a growth that would, by normal countries, be spectacularly successful, but we shouldn't assume that necessarily this, for Chinese administrators, is as successful as they want. So the question is, with these changes, will China use its continuing growth to seize the opportunity to get on a really green path, or will there be any backtracking? The remarkable thing is that the entire, not only this statement here made by the outgoing president about, for the first time, including ecological progress together with economic and cultural and political progress, but this is also now in the party constitution, which is the most sort of serious document that there is. So in terms of what to look for, how much progress will China make towards its energy goals? It set itself in its 12th five-year plan a goal to reduce by 2020 the carbon intensity of GDP by 41% since the year 2000. We can monitor that for the most part each year. Will China make progress on its carbon trading program? This year, as you know, 5 cities, 2 provinces have introduced cap-and-trade systems. This coming year, 2013, will be the first time ever where they will be seeking to measure at the plant level emissions of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. Will it be successful? The goal, as you know, is by 2015 to go to nationwide trading, by 2020 to be part of a networked carbon trading system. So remarkably ambitious. Will they make the progress that they hope to make in the coming year? And then finally, how will it think about its own energy future, its shale gas potential? Will it figure out how to do it right? And what will its policy be with regard to renewable energy? So that's the second question. The third question for 2013, in our view, is Africa. Africa is having a spectacular success. Remember, at the time of the Rio Earth Summit in 1992, Africa was coming out of 2 failed decades. Africa wasn't growing at all. Poverty was increasing. Well, in the last decade, Africa has been growing more rapidly than my country, the United Kingdom, ever grew during our Industrial Revolution. More rapidly than in today's industrial countries have ever grown. And look at this. So the dark blue are those that are over 5% a year over the last 5 years, and some spectacular ones, often led by extractive industries. So the real question for Africa, which is a really crucial one, it's all the analysis now shows that Africa's lions, as they're called, are sort of pretty similar to Asia's tigers 20 years ago in terms of economic growth, in terms of social achievement, growth in infrastructure and education and so on. Will it grow in a healthy, green way, or will it grow as many other countries have gone and get into all kinds of troubles? And the secret really is the quality of governance. But just to sort of give some more numbers, urban population is going to grow massively. the moment, we tend to think of some countries in Asia where you've got this huge growth in urban. Africa's is just beginning. Look how low it is now. Only 1/3 of Africa's population is urban. In the next 40 years, it's going to go to 2/3. This is an unprecedented, almost in human history, this scale of urbanization. The middle class in Africa, there's now 300 million Africans who are middle class, by the way, but huge inequalities. So whilst you get this sort of urbanization, 65% are still living in slums in Africa. So these are huge questions. And 48%, even while the middle class is growing rapidly, almost half still live in absolute poverty. So I said that success or failure or the choice will to some extent depend upon governance. Now, this doesn't capture all governance. This captures issues relating to freedom of journalism, freedom of access to information, and so on. And you see it's a very mixed picture. Some countries have improved quite a bit over the last 10 years. Others have got worse on those measures. So this is concerning. Now, over the last few years, there's been a boom of foreign investment into Africa. As you know, last year about $80 billion went into Africa. 16 billion came from China. Half of all of it goes into extractive industries. And we all know that extractive industries can be a blessing, but sadly, they're often also a curse. And the second issue, so the first issue being extractive industries, how's that going to be managed? The second is the sort of massive problem of life on dry lands in a climate-changing world. The best estimates are that in some African countries, agricultural yields will fall by 40 to 50%, given projections on climate change by 2050. At the same time, 400 million people are already living on the dry lands. So how Africa responds to the extractive issue, how Africa responds to the dry land issue, are stories to watch. This is just one of the sort of really exciting things that's going on now. Global Environment Facility, World Bank, a number of bilateral players, but especially led by the countries in Africa. There's, the question is, which way will the desert go? And some very exciting developments moving from what was going to be a tree planting program, or rather old-fashioned, to an agroforestry, really quite lively program. This is called the Great Green Wall. One of the issues to watch for 2013. Now, in terms of extractive industry, there's under U.S. legislation, it's now required that mining and extractive industries require full disclosure. 2 other countries this year are thinking of putting that on. We should watch those, especially Canada. What will happen to that? And will that influence the way that mining and extractive industries is done? So what to watch for? Will we see more transparency from extractive industries in the coming year? And how will Africa respond to drought and food security issues, particularly in dry lands? And will we see the beginning of real political momentum for regreening? Question, big issue number 4, what's going to happen to the world's forests? Are we reaching a positive tipping point? So, for example, everyone knows that forests are hugely important in terms of the economy, 720 billion every single year, and we all know that 75 to 80% of the world's biodiversity is in forests. So what's been happening to forests? Well, we've been losing them, as I said before, at a totally unacceptable rate. Indonesia and Brazil are the 2 countries most important to watch, we believe, this year, simply because they have accounted for so much and because they offer hope for the future. So in terms of Indonesia, Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, who is the president of Indonesia, announced a moratorium 3 years ago, on new permits in natural forests and peatlands. That's now coming to an end this year. And the question is, will that be extended? And will President Yudhoyono, in his last 18 months in office, be able to see through what he has committed to do? In Indonesia, as in many other countries, when you approach an election, you tend to see more deforestation. The reason for that is that's how local politicians earn enough money to go into the election. So the next 18 months in Indonesia is going to be crucial, almost a make or break period. Brazil, as you know, great hope in terms of forestry, gone from the worst deforestation rates to really impressive rates, and we don't have the numbers as 2012, but we think that this will continue to decline. So Brazil needs to be watched. How will its new legislation affect the behavior of those who have been responsible for deforestation? So those are the questions to watch in terms of forest. But I did just want to tell you about one of the things we're going to be launching, because I think it's going to be quite important, Global Forest Watch 2.0. For the first time, everybody in the world, if you have a laptop or a computer and you understand how to go to Google Maps and find your way from here to Bethesda, you will be able to get real-time data updated every 2 weeks down to the 100-meter level anywhere on the Earth's surface, showing you what has happened to deforestation. We think it will be a game changer. So this, for example, is what it will show. This is Sumatra, for example. The pink bits are where deforestation has happened. This is up to 2006. This is 2008. It updates at 2009, and you see what happens. So we look forward to launching this in March or April this year, and we think it will be, so that's just a little sort of, to whet your appetite for something that's coming along, and we think it will be important. The fifth question that we think the world should be looking at in 2013 relates to financing. Will green investment survive the current squeeze? Look, we all know that because of the global recession, the entire financial industry has become more risk-averse, which is a pity, because if you want to solve the problems of green investment, you need to be willing to take risks. In energy alone, we need something like $1 trillion a year worldwide invested in green energy. At the moment, it's not bad. About a third of that is being provided. It means we're missing the boat by 2/3. Now, the problem is to invest in a solar power plant, or actually almost anything that's green, is more risky currently for a range of issues, partly due to technological risk, often due to what we call policy risk, because it relies, for example, on feed-in tariffs, but also because the financial profile is different. It's much more front-loaded, so you've got to put the money up front, and that means it's more risky. So we have a problem. The problem being that not only are inherently financial institutions more risk-averse, but we now have new regulations in the form of Basel III that are going to say, if you want to take more risky investments, you have to provision even more, and this makes it less profitable. So this is a real problem. What will happen? Actually, I see there's Mary Barton Dock, and she's sitting on that table over there. What's going to happen in the coming year? Well, there's going to be some public funds, some multilateral initiatives. One, for example, is the Green Climate Fund. This coming year, in the next 6 months, the Green Climate Fund will be designed in terms of its implementation. Watch to see how good it is. Watch to see the extent to which that's going to take risk seriously and is going to help address the risk that we were just talking about. Hopefully, by autumn 2013, the first funds will start entering the Green Climate Fund. Watch to see how much they are. Watch to see whether or not it actually happens. This could be a game changer, but many people think it won't be. Another thing, multilateral banks at Rio committed to $175 billion in green transportation. This is a very, very important commitment. Watch to see whether or not that helps address the problem of risk. Because the way you do business nowadays is not just to take public money and put it in public projects. 175 billion simply isn't enough. The trick is to use that money to catalyze much bigger sums of money. So watch to see how that's designed, and watch to see the multilateral banks as to whether or not this year they can figure out which one of them is going to do what and how much they're going to pick up this commitment. So another thing to watch is private companies. We're starting to see, even amidst this risk-averse world, we're starting to see some pretty interesting things. So, for example, UPS is doing some very, very interesting things in what they call hurdle rates. That means if there's an investment in things that will save carbon dioxide, they require lower hurdle rates. Why? Because they know that they tend to have a short-term focus. They're trying to make the focus longer term. Johnson & Johnson, same thing. For investments that are good for the long-term future, they are now reducing their internally required rates of return. Unilever, I think you all know Paul Polman, who runs Unilever. He, 3 months ago, said, look, from now on, Unilever won't be giving quarterly financial reports. Why? Because quarterly financial reports keep us focusing on the short term, and we need to get a longer-term focus. Now, the financial markets were not very happy about this. What to watch for is whether or not companies like this will start setting the trend for an entirely new way of business, whereby companies say, no, we don't want just to focus on the short term, we want to focus on the long term. And finally, will there be new financial structures? Oh, sorry. There are a number of new exciting financial structures that are coming along. We've tended to believe that the $60 trillion that sits in what we call institutional capital, pension funds, insurance funds, tend to assume that those are very risk averse and won't go into really longer term investments, but starting to change actually. So for example, go to Denmark, Pension Denmark, you start seeing some very, very interesting innovations. So watch for these new structures that are emerging to enable inherently risk averse financiers to put their money in ways that would promote green growth. So what to watch for? Will new funding mechanisms emerge to de-risk the markets? Will companies recalibrate risks and adopt longer-term perspectives? And will new financing structures and new players emerge? Okay, so we now come to our final question. I'm sure you wondered whether there was going to be something on the United States and President Obama. And the question is, will Obama lead on climate change? I'm sure you have views on that. But the president said the issue of climate change is one that we ignore at our own peril. He said that when he was, before he ran for president. In his first term, did some very good things. Didn't yet add up, though. The United States doesn't have a climate change strategy. And whilst ignoring climate change we do at our peril, in the presidential debates we ignored climate change. So presumably that was at our peril. And that's why Bloomberg Business Week came out, as you know, and many of the journalists here have written equally strong things saying it's global warming stupid. So now, the question is, will the growing trend, once again, 2012 was the hottest year on record in the contiguous United States. 300 records were broken for the United States. This month is the 332nd month in a row where global temperatures are above average. So, when last year, the drought that's going on right now will cost the United States 1% of GDP, probably, possibly more. That will make it the most expensive natural disaster in US history. How much more is required before citizens start saying, hey, wait a minute, we have to change the way we do business? Well, the good news is that actually citizens pretty much are getting in the right place anyway. All of the polling evidence suggests that 2/3 of the American population do actually believe climate change is real. They do believe it's caused by humans, and they do believe that it's affecting their lives and causing problems. Now, not enough of them yet feel that action is so essential that they're willing to take changes. So, what to watch? Will we see more political leadership? President Obama has promised to start a conversation on climate change. This is very important. Will it be more than a conversation? Who will President Obama appoint to his cabinet and to the White House? Will we see some appointments that really indicate a seriousness about this issue? And will the Obama administration become what we call a go-getter? Next month, the World Resource Institute will be issuing a report on whether or not the United States, given existing authorities that have been granted by Congress, whether or not it can reach the 17% goal for reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So that will be coming out in a couple of weeks. without wanting to sort of spill the beans, I think one can say that, well, actually, given shale gas and given the opportunities to use EPA to do good things with existing power plants, and given EPA's ability to do other things that are positive, you could probably get there. And that's good. Here's the thing. Simply getting to 2020 won't be enough. We need to position ourselves this decade so that we can go right through 2020 and get to where we need to get to, which is not reducing greenhouse gases by 17%, but reducing them between 80 and 90% by 2050. So it'd be a huge mistake to think because we can get to where we need to get to in 2020, that therefore we can relax for the rest of this decade. And so we're pretty confident that we're going to see some encouraging signs, and we're going to do all we can at World Resource Institute to be as helpful as we can within the United States so that President Obama, not only in his inaugural address next week, will make this issue, the green growth issue, featured, we hope, but thereafter will be put into practice. So thank you very much. 6 stories. What energy mix? Will China make progress towards its ecological goals? How will Africa's lions grow? Are we turning the corner on forests? How will green investment survive the squeeze? And will Obama lead on climate change? Thank you very much. The floor's open. Right. Anyone want to disagree? And Lisa, say who you are first. I think do we have some microphones? Yes, we do. Maybe say who you are first.
Okay.
We all know you.
Thanks. Lisa Friedman from Climate Wire. Thanks for doing this. This was great. I have a question on the international negotiations, which I see isn't one of the stories, and I realize this 2015 agreement is a couple years away, but 2 years before Copenhagen, it was still Copenhagen was at the top of a lot of these lists. So I guess I'm wondering if, has the excitement, expectation gone away from the idea of an international agreement? Is it that what happens domestically and in some of these countries is more important right now? Speak a little bit, if you could, about what you expect. And
maybe the excitement's gone away, but the imperative of having a global deal hasn't gone away. I think it's more important than ever. It is absolutely, fundamentally essential that the world reaches an agreement on climate change. And as you know, the world has, 194 nations have decided that they will reach agreement by 2015 to come into impact 2020. The moment, if you go to those negotiations, quite frankly, I know you went to the recent ones in Doha. They're not encouraging. But that doesn't mean that they won't be encouraging. And so what institutions like us have to do is work extraordinarily hard with different negotiators, with different countries. We've launched a major program, or what we call climate justice, with the Mary Robinson Foundation, because we think, those of us that were in Rio, in the original Rio, and saw those world leaders sign up to the Climate Change Convention, the Biodiversity Convention, this was really a moral moment. A lot of these leaders really were committed to this. And they were committed on grounds of justice and equity, fairness for the future generations and for citizens today. That has evaporated. So what we're going to try and do is sort of help in a modest way, sort of rescue the notion of climate justice. So the answer is we must never, ever, ever give up on the global deal. But here's the point: we're not going to count on it. And in addition to that, we believe that there's a new world of sort of mini multilateralism, of sort of club deals that we're starting to see in this last year, by the way, where those who do want to lead will get together and help each other. And those should be designed in a way that then feeds back into the global negotiations. By the way, we have Jennifer Morgan over there who knows much more about this than I do. So at some stage, Jennifer, you should feel free to come in. Thanks, Lisa. Yes.
Albert Nikemkin from GG Environmental Economist. Now that you've left the World Bank and can speak freely, I wonder how you look back on the World Bank's contribution to climate change and improving and sustainable environmental projects, and what do you foresee for the next years ahead for the bank?
Well, I was at the original Rio Earth Summit and wrote the World Development Report that sort of laid out the first time that we really tried to capture the World Bank, the relationship between economic development and the environment. And while there, the World Bank booth was burned down by NGOs. And I was physically thrown off the Rainbow Warrior. I also went back to this Rio 20 years later. And the World Bank actually had become, in many ways, zippier and more demanding than some NGOs. And so to see the World Bank this time demanding that countries and building coalitions so that countries would adopt new ways of doing business in the way they do their national accounts is wonderful. Now, it's a journey, and so, I mean, certainly we believe the World Bank has still a long way to go. I mean, I think there still is the issue of coal. It's politically extraordinarily difficult, but why not take it on? There's the issue here of how to finance green investments. How much money are we spending on roads versus truly green investments? I was in Bangalore last week and saw investments that are extraordinarily expensive, investments that are extraordinarily cheap and are better for people. And the more we can move away towards greener bus rapid transit, for example, instead of big, more roads, more subways, and so on. So I think there's room for improvement, but I mean, a remarkable transformation, I would say, yeah. Yes?
I'm Chris Hawley from the Energy Daily. And my name is Chris Hawley. I'm with the Energy Daily. And I'd like to ask you what would be clear and convincing evidence that Obama is indeed leading on climate change or not. And yesterday, the Sierra Club had a press conference announcing a 100-day campaign to pressure the administration to use all its administrative tools to advance the goals of reducing carbon pollution. And the Keystone XL pipeline came up. And there seems to be a real split of opinion between environmentalists and energy journalists on what the administration plans to do. One of the club's leaders said that initially, 3 years ago, they thought there was no chance that Obama would reject the pipeline. And today, they think there's a 70% chance he will. And I think if you polled 100 experienced energy journalists, they would say the thing's greased. So would a decision to approve the pipeline definitively answer question 6?
Well, I've said a few things about this, but you know you're allowed to call a friend, aren't you? Jennifer, tell us about the pipeline. No, just say the sort of the 3 litmus tests that you see.
Sure. Jennifer Morgan with WRI. I think number 1 is what President Obama and his administration does with their existing authority. They've started on new power plants. If they were to move forward with existing power plants, which is a major source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, that would certainly be part of an evidence base. I think certainly the way that he goes on Keystone is going to send a major signal as well. We don't do any technical work on that, but that is a major priority for the environmental community, as you've indicated. And then third, I would say, is this question of the national conversation that he spoke about in his first press conference after the election. And the question about a conversation is, how long does it last, and do you lead it? And so I think seeing how he engages and uses the bully pulpit to engage America in the impacts that are already occurring in this country, the costs of those impacts and the solutions and the opportunities is a key piece. And then last but not least, of course, I have to mention what his new Secretary of State will do how the U.S. is going to engage internationally. Is it going to engage in a way that's consistent with the 2 degrees target and put forward new progressive ideas or not? So those would be my 4 indicators.
Great. Thank you. Yes, Stuart.
Thanks. Stuart James, World Bank. I want to lead on from that discussion, and I thought the indicators you put up about U.S. public opinion were very, very interesting, but I wondered if they would look the same when you start discussing some of the trade-offs and the behaviours that have to change to address the issue. And so my question is, if you were Obama, what do you think the key arguments are to convince people and to convince, say, Congress that this is really worth taking tough decisions about?
Well, I think both on the sort of the stick and the carrot side, I mean, one of the remarkable things that's happening at the moment is across the political divide at the local level, leaders and citizens groups are saying, wait a minute, there's something odd going on here. So whether in Maine or whether in Florida, actually there is a growing awareness. There's, I think, five counties in Florida that have formed this climate change and sea level group. And so I think communicating that actually costs are real, as we saw in New Jersey and we saw in New York and elsewhere, of course. So one is that, like, you know, which is, come on, guys. I mean, the science is overwhelming. We're on the science sort of maybe where we were on smoking, you know, in 1975 or something like that, you know, where 97% of science is in one place, but 3% is still in a different place. So one is on that. Second is on the sort of the positive vision, which is much easier that story to make in many developing countries. I mean, it's quite striking. Go to Vietnam, you know, there's a climate change commission and a green growth high-level panel. Why? Because that's actually the future they want to have. You know, why did China invest $50 billion last year in renewable energy? It's partly because they want to be world leaders, but actually they like to be economic leaders as well, and they actually want better lives for their citizens. And actually, whilst the evidence is not absolutely robust yet, renewable energy uses more people to work on it. Jobs are greater in renewable energy than they are in conventional energy. The evidence is overwhelming that actually the hit on your growth rate is very modest and very quickly. And anybody who does a sort of a projection of economic growth with and without action, I mean, pretty quickly you come to the conclusion that it actually makes sense. Unfortunately, that crossover value is outside your own election period, but my goodness, it ought to be possible to talk about our children and our children's children. So I do think that the communication, as you say, is important. I mean, I'm sure you've seen the various sort of surveys that they've done. If you do a survey in New York Kennedy Airport, people flying to Los Angeles, and if you say, look, would you be willing to pay a carbon tax of $20 in order to, the government can have because you're going to be polluting on the way to California? 85% would say no. But if you say, hey, look, would you want to be part of the solution and pay $20 as part of this to offset, you know, what we now know is a problem, and we're going to use it for really terrific things, you will find that about 65% say yes, they're willing to pay. So, I mean, it's all in the communication, and we haven't done a very good job, and I think some on the other side have done probably a better job than we have at inspiring. Yes?
George Kelly, Environmental Bank and Exchange. I see your list of 6, and I don't see water resources and biodiversity on there. I'm just curious as to why they didn't make the list.
Well, this is the trouble of doing this every year, you see. We don't feel, I mean, there also wasn't one specifically on cities. So, of course, biodiversity will be on next year again. Water, my goodness. Water is absolutely crucial. One of the things we're going to do, and I know you work on this yourself a great deal, but we will, next month, be launching a new version of what we call Aquaduct, which looks, as you know, at the world, there are 285 major river basins in the world, looks at what's happening to quantity and quality, and then has a projection a capacity based on IPCC scenarios and on assumptions on growth and population. And it is profoundly scary. So I apologize. Next year. Yes, Mary.
Mary Barton, World Bank. Andrew, I was just wondering, you talked a lot about potential opportunities in the U.S. and China. In Africa, when you look at the list of top emitters, India and Russia are also on the list and are maybe not presenting as many opportunities. And I wondered if you saw any progress on that front. We're starting to think a lot about how to deal with more intensively with the top emitters and try to particularly focus on countries where we see opportunities to do that. The other thing which I was curious about is we're also, and the U.S. Is pushing this, looking a lot at short-lived climate pollutants as a possibility of buying time on 2020. And the final question is, of course, as you know, somebody asked about water. After the last year, I would be remiss not to wonder why oceans isn't on your list.
God. How long would you like me to go on for? Well, on the first look, I think in India there are real prospects of advance. Actually, there it's more at the state level, obviously. Striking last week, I was in Bangalore for something we were launching with the Indian Chamber of Commerce on green power purchase, essentially getting together some of the major companies in Karnataka state, together with developers, together with regulators, together with utilities, and asking the question, why is renewable energy not growing the way it should, given that these big private companies have all indicated that they want and need renewable energy. Why? Because it's good for their security and good for their economics moving forward. And there's a whole set of well-known barriers. And just as a few years ago for the United States, we created a Green Buyers group, which basically removed all kind of barriers and became a game changer here, so that things are totally different in this country now. If you're a company and you want to buy green energy, or you want to create green energy on your roof and sell it into the grid, radically changed for the better here. In countries like India, that's just beginning. And we saw just massive support for that. And you look at sort of the innovation among small and medium enterprises in India. There's huge opportunities, and just for their long-term energy. So we think there are real prospects there. I don't have views on Russia. Anybody want to mention? Anybody on here want to talk about India or Russia? In terms of oceans, very important. What was your middle question? Yes, yeah. Well, those are they save us a few years. The great thing about them is that most of them are good for their own sake, whether or not you believe in climate change. So look at the soot and smoke in Beijing. That is justified. Action on that is justified regardless of climate change, but it has a very temporary benefit for climate change. It's obviously no one is proposing to put all eggs in that basket, because that would be very dangerous. Good. Thank you. Yeah, anyone else that hasn't? Yeah. Good.
I just wonder if your research has uncovered any particularly interesting, promising technology that we should be watching this coming year that may help us turn the corner.
Very good question. I'm going to look over here to a brains trust over here. Anyone want to talk about technology? Nigel does. Yeah? Yeah, you want to say a word about that?
That's a very interesting question. My name's Nigel Sizer. I head up the forest team at WRI, and Andrew mentioned Global Forest Watch 2.0, which we'll be launching later this year. And that wouldn't be possible without some extraordinary advances in technology. Three in particular. and advances that have taken place there within recent months and years, and that we depend upon for continued work in that field. And those technologies are remote sensing using satellite systems. So there is a revolution going on in remote sensing as microsatellites are designed and launched, which cost about 1% of some of the existing satellite platforms and are able to perform somewhat similar tasks. So dramatic reduction in the cost of remotely sensed satellite imagery, and then the ability to analyze the enormous amounts of data that generates using cloud computing. So this is a very underappreciated area of technological advance, I would say, in our field. The era of big data meeting sustainability challenges and our ability to process and manage terabytes and terabytes of data across the world, again, at very rapidly diminishing costs. And then thirdly, our ability to transmit and share that information with everyone around the world, right out into the field, and poor farmers in some of the poorest developing countries who now have access to incredibly low-cost mobile telephony and very low-cost smartphones and so on. So a combination of advances in those fields is partly what's enabling us to revolutionize access to information for everyone everywhere about forests, and surely has many, many other applications which will be fascinating to see emerge in the years to come.
Talking of those technologies, Betsy Otto heads our water work. Do you want to just say a word also on the new technology embedded in the aqueduct?
Sure. So as Andrew mentioned, we're actually going to be launching on January 30th our new Aquaduct Mapping tool, which looks at water risk around the world. And we've been able, just in the same way that Nigel has talked about, to take advantage of data, publicly available data, and we're actually looking at remote sense data to add a level of precision and accuracy around our understanding of the water picture globally. So we're very excited about releasing that. We're pulling together that information in an online tool that companies and investors, NGOs, and governments can use to have a better understanding geographically of what's happening with water today and in the future.
Good. Did you want to add something?
Thanks. On the energy side of things, we don't look at necessarily specific technologies, but we spend quite a lot of time looking at what we call the innovation ecosystem to see actually how you're going to accelerate the pace of the development and the deployment of those technologies. And so there, stories to watch or things to look for are, that long-term policy framework, obviously, but also things that one often forgets, which is the training and the capacity of people to actually be putting those technologies into the market, the private finance, the public-private finance that needs to be there, and the long-term R&D side of things. So we've done quite a bit of work, if you look on our website, on that, because you really need to get those factors right to kind of push that forward. And on each technology, it's slightly different.
Good. Look, I do think that there are, there are technology breakthroughs, sort of, my goodness, this will solve things, but then there are other much more subtle reductions in costs and learning and sharing. I mean, look this year at Morocco concentrated solar. Huge criticism a year ago. Should Morocco invest in the Ouarzazate plant? It's going to be very expensive, 29 cents a kilowatt hour. Well, the bids actually came in at about 18 cents a kilowatt hour, 10 cents lower than expected. Why? Because actually the technology had improved more rapidly. Costs had come down more than had been anticipated. And in many ways, the most important technologies for some of these questions are technologies that are very old. I mean, think about dry lands in Africa. Think about the whole sort of simple, what we like to call the triple win, mulching, minimum tillage, slightly improved seeds, but also, ground cover, trees, bushes. I mean, these are things that have been around for ages, but are now coming back. And so we're learning from huge successes in countries like Niger. We're now seeing that replicate. That's technology, albeit not the kind of technology that we normally think. So too, I see Holger Daltman over there, who is our director for Embark, which is our sustainable transport. I mean, when Jaime Lerner, the mayor of Curitiba, sort of came up with the idea of bus rapid transit, that was new technology. But now, how many cities in the world is that growing in? Well, that was to the point. That's an example of a technology that is spreading. Yes.
My name is Joe Browder. I just wanted to say, because you brought up the Morocco issue, one of the technology issues that is most important is whether new energy is going to be developed in a more distributed, close to the user way. Yeah. And we're about to have an enormous debate about that in this country, with a lot of people who invested in what they're now calling stranded renewable energy out west, wanting to force cities around the country to spend hundreds of billions of dollars that they don't have to bring, western sun and western wind to the east and that sort of thing. I really think that the world would benefit from a focus on your part on looking at the benefits of this big sun to replace big coal, versus the benefits of distributed generation. Because I just personally don't think that the Morocco example is the best example of solar technology. You might also check out the people at Carnegie Mellon, their Center for the Study of the Electricity Industry. They have done some remarkable analysis that shows lower value wind and sun generated closer to the markets that will use them is much more economic in terms of dollars invested per greenhouse gas avoided than remote higher quality wind or sun. So I just think that's something that's worth focusing on.
Well, I think that's a very good point. Look, I mean, there are no silver bullets. I mean, we need a portfolio of larger plants and distributed plants. But I agree with you totally that the relative merits of the distributed approach close to home have been improving, and therefore the balance may need to shift. Yes, at the back.
Zubida Lauer from the World Bank. Hi, Andrew. I couldn't miss the opportunity of talking about communication and the way we drive the message about the need to act now and green the infrastructure and green the investments and greening the growth path. So given your excellent communication talent, how are you using the unprecedented rates of urbanization happening in developing countries and emerging countries to bring the message home about the high concentration that will happen in the next 30 years of people and assets, mostly in coastal cities, and so where the damages are going to be the highest if there is no action in terms of adaptation?
Looking to our Vice President of Communication here. Look, Zubida, I totally agree with you. I mean, the urbanization can be a huge part of the solution, can be a huge part of the problem. If you look at the United States average greenhouse gas emissions, let's say it's 20 tons. Look at China's, let's say it's 6 tons now. Look at New York's, it's below 10 tons. Look at Beijing, it's 11 tons. So it's interesting that a city like Beijing is much, much worse than the national average. A city like New York is much, much better. It simply illustrates in a rather crude way that according to how cities are designed, and your point being exactly right, designed well, designed compactly, designed with public transportation in mind, designed with people and livability in mind, it's very, very much part of the solution in every way. Designed with no care for spatial location, designed with no care for the impacts of climate change and sea level rise, we're going to be in very, very big trouble. And, a country like the Philippines, of its, 1,500 municipalities, 2/3 of them, are already highly vulnerable to storm surges. I mean, it's tragic, and it's going to get worse and worse. And, we do need to assume this decade, this century, at least a meter rise in sea level, and that's what the U.S. Navy is assuming, and we should assume that is sort of basically the base. Now, maybe not, but that's even before we start thinking about melting ice. It's simply the expansion of the water that comes from heat. So, look, we're in a very serious situation, and I very, very much appreciate the point you're making, and we need to convey it. The really good thing is that, as you know, I mean, in many developing countries, there's a lot of awareness of this issue. I mean, a lot of fear of this issue. I mean, look at a country like Vietnam, what they're trying to do on resilience. I used to live in Vietnam 15 years ago. And it's the most affected country in the world by typhoons because it's 1,000 miles north to south, and they just come across the coast. And a typhoon that would have killed 300 people then would now kill maybe 20 or 30 people today. That is because of resilience that's now been built in through early warning systems and different design structures and so on. So there actually is an awareness, but I agree with you. We need to just become better and better at communicating sort of the truth. Yes, sir.
I'm up front. I don't know if I need one of these. I guess it'll help. John Lewis, Terra Global Capital. I apologize for being late, but I feel there's like an elephant in the room we're not talking about here. You know, we mention environmental justice, and that quickly becomes a north-south thing. The prosperous countries that polluted their way into prosperity, as opposed to the southern countries. Then we talk about forests. Then we cite the example of Niger. Niger happened because of a donor coordination that forced, FORCED, the host governments in 9 Sahaline countries to change their forest codes. Now, DFID was the only major donor that eschewed that French-dominated, but the World Bank participated, forcing of them to change their forest codes, because forests are a kind of political, bonus. They're part of the patronage system. They still are in a lot of these vulnerable forest countries. And putting my U.S. taxpayer hat back on, like most Americans, there's no confidence that the UN system will address that elephant in the room, that these governments, on a good day, don't care about their people, and they don't want to give up control of the forest, and yet, of course, forest protection or forest extension, as in the case of Niger, depends on homesteader incentives, homesteader laws. I haven't heard that word, homesteading. And donors each go their own way, and there's no peer pressure organization besides the UN, which doesn't exercise any peer pressure from a U.S., ignorant position point of view. And so, I know WRI has some of the most aggressive research in this direction, but it hasn't come up since I walked into the room this morning.
I'm looking over there at Peter or Nigel. Do you want to respond to that? Yeah. The committee meeting going on over here.
Thank you, John. Again, I'm Nigel Sires, the head of the forest team. You know a great deal about this and the history, and you make some very good points. I think the thing I would say in response to that is that what we are seeing in a number of countries where forests are very important is the emergence and advocacy of domestic constituencies for improving the way these resources are managed. We see that very, very strongly in Brazil. The dynamics in Brazil around the recent forest code discussion was primarily a domestic dynamic and debate that put enormous pressure on the head of state to veto controversial legislation. And I think we're seeing some similar dynamics in Indonesia. And across Africa, I think we see this beginning to emerge. Improvements in access to information and some of the technological advances we mentioned help promote this as well. Of course, people have greater access and understand more about what's going on, what's at stake, and are better able, more easily able to organize themselves and mobilize for change. So that's certainly something that we would encourage and continue to support, working on better understanding. We're in the process of, as you know, launching something called the Africa Regreening Initiative across the drylands of Africa, which aims to support those efforts and support the scale-up of promising work with agroforestry and regreening, improving food security, greenhouse gas emissions mitigations, conservation, and so on.
Peter, anything?
I knew you were going to ask that question. My name is Peter Feit. I'm in the Institutions and Governance program. I suppose partly I wanted to support what Nigel was saying. We certainly work with a lot of public interest law groups who have provided similar pressure on governments to respond and to devolve user rights or to actually evolve property rights to communities regarding various natural resources. And so we're seeing more and more of that. Clearly there's a great diversity in Africa, and there are some countries that are decentralizing much better and democratizing much faster than others. And so I just wanted to underscore what Andrew had been saying earlier, that a lot of this is about governance issues. And the ones that we tend to focus on in the Institutions and Governance program is the rights of access to information, the rights of access to participation, and the rights of access to justice. And so our feeling is that through those three procedure rights, we can get citizens, we can get NGOs engaged in the process of holding their governments accountable. Information obviously is key to citizens understanding what their government is doing, how they're performing on their responsibilities. So this is not a simple solution, but it's part of the answer, I think.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, Marion.
Thank you very much. Actually, my question was about governance, and it partially was... I'm Marion Plessis-Fressard, ex-World Bank, and on the advisory council of Embark. My question was on governance, and when you have shown the multitude of activity sectors and stakeholders that are needed, and the problem comes after WRI has done this fantastic work of clarifying the issues, educating, defining the winning actions to be taken. There will be above the governance problem, the problem of sequencing and organizing. And I can think of another theme of the same kind of complexity, which is road safety. It's a smaller problem, although it still kills a lot of people every year. And the problem has been branding the institutional and governance anchorage for leading that subject, because we have seen that when we do all the good things that WRI is telling us on environment, you still need the leadership, you still need the coherence of activities at local and regional level and government level and international. And I think perhaps this capacity to sequence and coordinate and drive is not located in one place. And in the absence of that, how can we ensure appropriate governance and leadership?
That we can't ensure it. What we can do is learn from what's happening. And one of the reasons I love working at this particular institution is that we're not only a think tank, we're a do tank. And so, for example, the Access Initiative, which is the leading group of civil society organizations around the world fighting for precisely the three things that Peter talked about, that is there. We sustain that. It's been there for 10 years. And so it's not a matter of writing reports saying, here you go, and going home. Not at all. We've found that that doesn't work. I'm wondering whether, just one word, Holger, on the road safety and the governance issues, because that's... Mayor Bloomberg has given us a large sum of money to work precisely on that, kindly.
Thank you, Maria Yvonne. My name is Holger Dörkmann. I'm the director of the Embark program, which is a sustainable transport program of the World Resources Institute. Just one word on the multi-level governance. And in fact, we just came from Bangalore in India. And India is now launching for the next 5 years their National Urban Renewal Program. They want to invest $40 billion US, so a real story also to watch. And it's important also that this goes in line also with the right institutional setup. So we're working also as WI on the ground, helping on urban planning, on bus rapid transit to make that possible. But we have seen also, and that's also the advice and to the Indian government, So if you bring buses, for example, to Jaipur where we worked, then you also do not have to have just 2 people also to make that system running. So in the next setup also of this 40 billion is also investment for capacity building. So here this is vital also to have the local implementation, but also have the national program wide to recognize that. And I think that's really important.
Good. Look, thank you all very much. Oh, what's one final one then?
Faith Grant, Streamline Consulting. My question is, what kind of impact is the global reinsurance industry having on the climate change discussion? And do you think their voice is being leveraged to its greatest effect?
Well, that's a very specific question. I'm going to look at Kirsty, because we're doing a little bit of work with the insurance industry. Kirsty Jenkinson is our Director of Markets and Enterprise.
Right, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, it's a tough question. I mean, I think if you look at the likes of Swiss Re and Munich Re, who are the global leaders in reinsurance, they've really been setting the pace for exactly how, you know, the risks of climate adaptation and how to model out to the future of, obviously, you know, unknown losses in the future. They really are leading the world on that. And there are a number of other global reinsurers as well. I think the challenge still is how you get this to feed through into the actual insurance industry, into premiums, into how people pay for those. So where I see the most thought leadership happening is definitely at those sort of global reinsurers. Where it hasn't trickled down is how to the actual insurance companies then price that into their policies, and also how they affect that in the way in which they invest, because these are obviously huge amounts of assets that need to be invested well. And I don't see those kind of investment schemes replicating the same kind of sort of awareness of the risks that you're seeing. So I think there's 2 ways to look out for there. One is, will more reinsurers start to see actually their clients, the insurers, sort of pick this up? And secondly, what's actually happening to the insurance industry's assets and what they're doing in their own investment portfolios?